Great. Welcome, welcome everybody on a wonderful Saturday afternoon when I know everybody would be getting ready to be at Oshkosh in about 2 days. But here we are at the virtual Osh, and we appreciate everyone's time today, Saturday, for the webinars, for those that were here earlier, for Chris's and Kristin's in a few moments. A couple house cleaning order things here. First, we want to thank Aircraft Spruce for sponsoring our webinars yesterday, today, and tomorrow. For those that have been to the gathering at Wapaka, you know what it's all about. We've been doing this for the last 16 years. It's 26 nautical miles away from Oshkosh. It's phenomenal. All of our supporters, or many of our supporters that want to do a presentation are there. They're at our gathering in front of a lot of people. This is a picture of last year's gathering at Wapaka. And all these people, kind of going in a little bit, we have so much fun. They show up on a Friday, we're there Friday, Saturday, some on Thursday. Sundays are the big conversations. We typically host all of these seminars in one day, but obviously with COVID, we're here. We decided to spread it out for 3 days because it's kind of hard to sit in the chair for 8 hours straight. But this is what we do. We've been doing it for 16 years. A lot of our supporters, companies, advertisers want to be there. They want to be in front of you guys, our audience, and we appreciate them. We appreciate you because it's because of members like you. We're here, and we've got Kristin and Steve Ells, all these people that work and write for us and are contributing editors, put together the best content for you guys, and we appreciate you being here on a Saturday to listen to Kristin's Logbooks 101. So we know that. I think at this point, I'm going to probably hand the floor over to Kristin, so she'll discuss things. Now hang around till the end, type your questions in. That's how we finish this off. And you will have Kristin's contact at the end. You'll have a slide with her email. If you've got any questions that you want to come up with, you thought of something tonight and you're like, oh, I wanted to ask this, send her an email. Say, hey, I got a question. What about this problem or scenario with a logbook? What are your suggestions? And she'll be happy to answer them. So to that, I hand the floor over to Kristin Winter. And there's...
Okay. Well, welcome to the replacement Wapaka. This was going to be my first year, so I'm very disappointed that didn't get to do this in person, but this is almost as good. So anyway, we're going to talk about logbooks. So welcome to the lost world of general aviation maintenance record keeping. Between mechanics who became mechanics to get away from having to do paperwork, and owners that don't really realize that they're responsible for the maintaining the maintenance records of their aircraft. This is an area of ownership that has been long neglected. We're going to take a look at what the FAA requires. We're going to take a look at what mechanics' responsibility is to make logbooks. We're going to talk about what the what logbook entries should look like and rarely do. We're going to look at the owner and operator's responsibility for maintaining the records as a whole. And finally, we will look at some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the actual maintenance entries that I have collected over the years of doing pre-purchase inspections. Anyway, just by way of introduction, as you can see, I'm Kristin Winter, and I bought my first airplane in 1986, and have bought and sold for my own uses and assisted dozens of other people with pre-purchase inspections, logbook reviews, etc. pretty much since then, so for about 35 years. So I've had an opportunity to look at an awful lot of logbooks, and I have to say that in general, overall, they're in a fairly sorry state. So anyway, first of all, we need to probably clear up a few definitions that the FAA uses that you ought to know about. The first is people often don't really understand what it is that they have to track time-wise on their aircraft. By FAA definition, maintenance is determined by time in service. Now, normally we use tack times for that, or we use hobs, and those technically aren't correct, because time in service is the liftoff of the ground to when it touches down. And if you notice on older logbooks, they basically kind of expect, the format of old paper logbooks is they expected you to enter in each flight the time that you got off and the time you got on. I think that is a holdover from the military, and is a whole lot easier if you have a co-pilot than if you're flying yourself, which 99% of us are. So you have to understand that hobs running off the engine is not necessarily quite correct. And tachometers are not technically correct either, but the FAA has pretty much accepted that for, you know, decades and decades. But to be completely accurate, nowadays with some of the GPS units, you can hook it to, you know, they're set to calculate the actual time you are in the air. And if you were to transfer that to some sort of a record, you could actually use that. And in all probability, for most people, you would actually extend your times for required maintenance by actually using the time in service as opposed to just the raw tack time or the raw hobs time. The other one is the owner and operator, because the owner and operator has certain responsibilities here. Obviously, it's the legal owner counts as the owner of the airplane. You're on the registration, you're the legal owner. Operator, it can be a little bit fuzzier. Certainly for somebody that formally leases an airplane, that would be an operator, while not being the owner. And typically, of course, the person or entity that is responsible at that particular time. The question can come up as to whether, you know, a more casual owner or casual operator of the airplane, you know, like, for example, you know, somebody's son who actually flies the airplane more than everybody else, who's the actual responsible person here. The other another two terms here is the rebuilt versus overhaul. These have a tendency to be used kind of interchangeably. But in truth, rebuilt is defined by the FAA as specifically as disassembled, inspected, and repaired in accordance with maintenance instructions. And overhaul doesn't really have a hard definition. Though when it comes to engines and things, there are certain things that have to be, the maintenance instructions, you know, require certain things be replaced and certain things being done. But just because you've got an airplane engine that has been quote unquote overhauled, it doesn't tell you enough about what actually was done to the airplane. And then returning to service is the formal FAA term for approving the airplane for return to service, and is done with the maintenance entry. And, you know, typically it means that the maintenance shop has surrendered the airplane back to you. Who's responsible for the aircraft maintenance records? Well, believe it or not, it's not the mechanic or the IA. It is the owner or the operator. In our case, you know, 99% of the time, it's going to be the owner. And in my experience, a lot of owners pay very little attention to the records. They just hand the books off to the mechanics for the annual inspection. They pick them up again, then they put them someplace. And that can be a big mistake. First of all, you need to talk about what are maintenance records. We tend to refer to them colloquially as logbooks, but they're not just limited to the bound paper books that normally pass for maintenance records. I mean, it can be computerized. It can be on, you know, the airlines is all computerized. General aviation, at least until you get up into the corporate realms, and multi-million-dollar airplanes have a tendency, you know, we still pretty much use the paper records. But you've got the logbooks themselves, which has the individual maintenance and inspection entries in them, but also The AD compliance sheets are part of the records and need to be maintained. FA forms 337, where the mechanic or inspector has made major alterations or major repairs, those get entered onto a 337, which is often done with STCs, etc. All of those are part of the records and need to be held on to. Yellow tags and forms 8130-3, colloquially called yellow tags because that's what they all used to be, and now they're pretty much the actual form. But these are all, these are when primarily when subcontracted work has been done on some component that your mechanic then installs. Those are part of the record. If your mechanic has told you needed a rebuilt magneto, and you agree, and he puts in a new magneto or a rebuilt magneto, and he's got it entered in the logbooks, he or she needs to give you the 8130-3 form that came with the work that was done on that magneto. As just an example, it could be any other component or accessory too. Work orders, when they hand you the bill, that very often becomes part of the maintenance record when the mechanic makes some kind of lame logbook entry. For example, something like, overhauled engine, see details, work order number such and such. Well, he incorporated that work order by reference into the aircraft maintenance records, and you need to hang on to those. And I would say that, over the course of an airplane's 50-year or longer life, most of those work orders that are referenced in the logbooks are no longer available. And it's understandable. Most owners don't realize that work orders can be maintenance records, and they take it as a bill and they write a check and they stick it in their financial files. 3 years later, after they filed their taxes, they throw it away. But they're throwing away part of the aircraft maintenance, and it can be a very costly mistake too. I have managed to avoid for clients having to take their engines partially apart to determine whether an AED was complied with, because there was no work order or no parts list of what was in the engine. But if there is, and the owner provides the work order, and I can see that the part that was installed was not the one that was referenced in the AED, I can then sign the AED off as not applying to that airplane. Otherwise, there's certainly been cases where I've had to take accessory cases off or even cylinders off to determine whether some internal part that is now under AD had been hit by an AD or a service bulletin, etc. And sometimes there are other documents. When you do an engine overhaul, very often there'll be a parts list. The parts list should be maintained. That's part of the work that was done on the airplane. Very often those go by the wayside. Sometimes they're part of the work order or the invoice, and sometimes they're not. The FAA is very liberal in what actually legally needs to be required to be maintained by the owner. Your records, the actual logbook really, that has all the entries in them and the inspections and everything else, has to be maintained only for a year. Records that contain total time in service for each airframe and engine, current status of life-limited parts, time since last overhauls, items required to be overhauled, current status of required inspections, etc. Forms 337. So basically, you could get away with a signed-off status sheet, and you could throw your logbooks away, though you'd be throwing a lot of the value of your airplane right out the window if you were to actually do that. So Again, logbook entries, you actually can, after a year, you can throw your logbook, you know, and you could throw all those old logbooks away. But I don't know anybody that does that deliberately. Anyway, all the records in the previous slide have to be maintained permanently for the aircraft. And obviously the easiest way to do that is just to hang on to the logbooks. List of discrepancies from an annual can be discarded when the repairs are completed. That would be a circumstance where the airplane is coming, you've taken in for the annual inspection, and the mechanic has done the inspection and signed it off by saying that the, I certified that the airplane has been inspected in accordance with an annual inspection, and a list of discrepancies have been provided the owner. That is basically the mechanic saying that can't approve the airplane, you know, to go back into service the way it is. Though after that, any A&P can correct the discrepancies, and then the airplane is back approved for return to service. And entries or documents that have been superseded may be discarded. Now, this is one area that you reasonably can throw some stuff out. And an example would be, you know, a yellow tag for a magneto overhaul in 1978 that has now been overhauled, like, you know, multiple different times. You can throw those yellow tags out, or the 8130s, and obviously, you know, for people that install a zero-time engine, you know, they send the core along with the logbooks back to Lycoming or back to Continental, and you know, those then go away, which is, you know, that's perfectly acceptable. You can go back and cull anything that has been superseded without destroying the value of your airplane by discarding records. Now, here's what you should expect from your mechanics, but you know, don't always get. This is the actual, you know, language from FAR 43.9. This is the FAA telling the mechanic what they're required to do. They're required to make a description or reference data acceptable to the administrative work performed. This is the one that is very often not complied with. You know, it'll just, you know, replaced left main tire, which, you know, for a tire is not that big a deal, but it is kind of nice to, you know, to do it correctly. You'd say, you know, remove and replace right main tire in accordance with, you know, you know, Piper or Cessna's service manual, such and such. And, you know, you can, at the end of a long list of things you can do, you can refer back to. It becomes a lot more important when you're talking about things like, you know, that have their own maintenance manual, like heaters on twin engine airplanes, the engines themselves, magnetos. They all have their own maintenance instructions, maintenance manuals, and something like that is, you know, remove left magneto, you know, replaced condenser and points, time magneto, reassembled, all in accordance with, you know, Bendix or TCM maintenance manual, such and such. Data completion of the work is mostly, usually in an entry, but every once in a while we find some that aren't. The name of the person performing the work, and the person, the signature and certificate number, and kind of certificate held by the person approving the work. Typically that's the same, you know, the last two bullet points are the same person. So, you know, the signature, certificate number, and you know, with A&P/IA or whatever the case might be, is compliant, and is usually what happens. Inspection entries are similar, but a little bit, the type of inspection and a brief description of the extent of the inspection. Calling it an annual inspection in accordance with Appendix D of Part 43 is common and acceptable. It's annual aircraft inspected in accordance with, Piper inspection form such and such, is another way that you might see that properly entered. The date of the inspection, the aircraft total time in service. Now, the total time in service gets missed a lot. Usually they have a number in there, but not always. But usually there's a number, but it's often like tack time. And the tack time is not the aircraft's total time in service. A good maintenance annual entry should have the total time on the aircraft, the total time on the engines, time since major overhaul, etc. But at least the aircraft total time in service is a requirement. The signature, certificate number of type, and type of certificate held, and the magic words approving or disapproving return to service. And as I said, Hobbs time or tack time is not legally acceptable. It's done more often, probably half of the annual entries I ever look at has just got a Hobbs or a tack time on it. And you have to go back in the records to try to figure out what the actual time in service is, and that doesn't meet the requirements, but it's pretty common. And unairworthy, disapproving an aircraft return to service after an inspection requires a signed and dated list of discrepancies sent to the owner. I find an awful lot of those lists, were just written out and they were not signed and dated. So, years later, you're kind of wondering, whether these actually got repaired or what even annual that they fit with. Reasons for keeping good maintenance records is, well, good logbooks help sell the airplane. Probably up to having done 8 or 9 of them this year already, and guarantee you that my clients are a lot more interested in ponying up something close to the asking price if the logbooks are in good condition or are complete, or reasonably complete, and reasonably well organized. As the owner, when you get your airplane back with the logbook entry, insist that the logbook entries are detailed enough so that you understand what was written. If you as a layperson can as the pilot and owner of the airplane, if you can read it and visualize what the mechanic did to your plane, then it's detailed enough. Other than logbooks, the ancillary records are good to organize in binders, 337s, AD compliance sheets, etc. Are a lot easier to view, are a lot more impressive to anybody you're selling the airplane to, a lot more impressive to the FAA if there's ever looking at it, and it makes it easier for if you have to change IAs on an annual, the more that they have to go digging in the logbooks to try to figure out where everything is at, the more they're going to charge you. Also, keep a section for instructions for continuing airworthiness, which is a subject that I don't think a lot of owners understand. The FAA didn't used to require holders of type, of STCs or people applying for an STC for a supplemental type certificate to modify an airplane. They didn't require them to produce the ICAs, the instructions for continuing airworthiness. Well, now the FAA has been requiring that for a number of years, and so every time you're installing a new piece of avionics or a new piece of equipment or something, it's going to come with instructions for continuing airworthiness. Your IA and the annual needs to review those to make sure that they're being complied with and have been complied with. Anything that needs to be done to sign the airplane off for an annual inspection. A lot of IAs are not very good about looking for ICAs and complying with them, but the ones that are, they can spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out and making phone calls to get copies of instructions for continuing airworthiness for all the fancy electronics that have been installed, or the new speed mod or whatever. And in fact, those things are sitting at the owner's home in a drawer or have been thrown out. Anyway, losing your logbooks, losing the aircraft maintenance records is kind of a disaster. And really some thought needs to be given. Most owners, in my experience, don't keep multiple copies. And logbooks realistically are pretty much impossible to recover unless you have copies. You might get some, you might be able to get your mechanic to cough up copies of entries if they've kept them for previous, for a couple, 3 previous annual inspections, and you can potentially do some reconstructing. But when it comes to trying to sell the airplane, you're going to take a huge hit unless you've got, and the easiest thing to do these days is just to photograph them. It doesn't take a long time. Don't even think about taking them to the copy machine. Don't even think about taking them to Kinko's to be scanned. It takes 15 to 20 seconds to scan a page, and it takes 1 click, in a fraction of a second to take a picture of your logbook pages. Just take the logbook, set it on the table with a cover open of airframe number 1, take the picture, open up the logbook to the first page it's got writing, take a picture of both pages together, turn the page, repeat until you've gone through all the logs, the AD compliance sheets and whatnot, and then load those up into the cloud, or put them on a thumb drive and stick them someplace, because guaranteed, if you lose the logs, if they're damaged in a fire, they get soaking wet and you can't open them. Having that available to you will save your bacon, basically. And without them, if you lose them because they're in your house and your house burns down and your airplane's in your hangar and now you've got no logbooks, you can potentially end up having to redo the annual inspection, redo ADs, or at least all the ADs be inspected for conformity. If you can't prove a status of a life limited part, you're going to have to throw it out and start over again. And this could be fantastically expensive, or may essentially just ruin the airplane's value to the point that you scrap it. Anyway, as I said, I've made many logbook reviews over the years, and I've saved a few of these as kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we'll kind of go through some of the examples. Now this is a very complete, annual entry. It's well described what was being done to the airplane. Since it's a sticker to go in the logbooks, of course, they put the N number, serial number, etc., and they've got the takt times and total times and everything. This is the kind of thing that you should expect, including when the ADs are due. Those can be kept on an AD compliance sheet and not in the records, but make sure they sign it. If they did an AD and the logbook entry says, see compliance sheet for compliance with ADs, look back there. If you've paid, sometimes up to thousands of dollars to have an AD complied with, make sure there's a signature with it in the AD compliance sheet. Because if you don't have a signature back there, and it's not referenced in the logbook entry that does have the signature, legally it wasn't done. Here's a nice annual entry. It's not a horrible one, except there's no takt time, no total time, no time in service, no nothing. So, you know, years later, it doesn't help you too terribly much. Gotta love this one. AD complied with, repaired as required. Well, what repairs? You know, what was done to the airplane? I mean, it's required to put it in there. Down the road, I mean, the owner has no way to know. The pilot, further pilots or further owners have no way of knowing what actually was repaired. So what, you know, what parts were actually replaced? And that then gives you an idea of, you know, whether it was done properly or whether it was just pencil whipped. Gotta love this one. And there's just tons of these. Usually when I see no maintenance entries, especially if there's a succession of these without a whole lot of time in between them, I usually just assume that this is generally a pencil whipped annual. You know, if you called up the IA 3 days later and asked them what color the airplane, you just annually wouldn't be able to tell you. This is one of my favorite ones. It's actually not a terrible entry except for one thing. The airplane was on it. The actual engine on the aircraft that matched this logbook was a different serial number than this one. And for 16 years, IAs just assumed it was a typographical. In this particular case, there was yellow tags and maintenance releases for independent components that don't match what he said here. So it's more likely that this airplane, its engine this entry got put into the wrong logbooks. Yeah, gotta love this. I see this one a lot. All ADs complied with. All of them? You know, you got a 172 and you did the ADs for a 421. I mean, how'd you do that? You know, they want you to assume that they've somehow discovered all the ADs that there were. Again, doesn't meet the requirements and doesn't help you in keeping track of what's going on with your airplane, and it isn't going to help you in ever trying to sell it. So, at any rate, it's generally in time for owners to kind of take control of their airplane's maintenance records, insist on better performance from the mechanics in terms of the record keeping, so that you can keep better records. And at this point, I'll take any questions that y'all might have.
In my camera here.
Go ahead and talk.
Well, that was great. Thanks a lot, Chris. We have a couple questions here. Let's see. Tom, is the AD compliance sheet a formal FAA form?
It is not. A lot of the shops subscribe to a service where they will, they can get a printout of all the ones that might possibly apply to that aircraft with that particular engine and some of the major ones. You know, Avlog provides them if you subscribe to their service. And, you know, there's nothing prevents an owner or a mechanic for that matter from creating one free form.
Okay. That actually brings us into the second question. Robert O'Neill, Avlog is copyrighted. Is there a similar logbook that is available without copyright?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't prevent you from, you know, creating one. I mean, there's the format that they use, you know, as long as it's not using, you know, their trademarks and you know, pretty much identical. But you can't really, you know, copyright a list.
Right.
which essentially is what that is. It's a list.
Okay.
So you
Okay.
can, you can get out Word and format it any way you want to.
Okay. Stefan has a question. AD compliance sheets versus log entry for the AD.
What you'd like to have, and some IAs do it one way and some IAs do it the other way. What you'd like to have is the AD compliance sheet basically lets you go back to the beginning of the airplane and show where all the ADs have been previously complied with. And then especially the one-time ADs, keeping that in some sort of a list that then refers back to the logbook entry that says where it was complied with. For example, on a Piper Comanche, there's an AD on the fuel events, which was 68-13-03, which either can be done as a 100-hour inspection, or you can have a kit installed to terminate the AD, which this is common, across all manufacturers will often have, ADs that can be terminated, or they can be done as a ongoing inspection. And the ones that have been terminated, it's good to have a list to say, okay, yeah, this one was complied with, this one was terminated by installing the kit, and here's when they're done repetitively. A lot of IAs will just keep track of the repetitive ones in the logbook entry itself. Would say, complied with AD 77-13-21 paragraph B by replacing the bungee cords in accordance with the Piper service manual, next due, at date and total time in service, so that the owner can look at that and go, okay, I need to be thinking about this needs to be done in 100 hours or 300 hours or whatever the case may be.
Okay. Okay, let's see here. Gordon. Recently, I did a pre-purchase inspection of logbooks on a Cessna 150. The airplane had been converted to a tailwheel configuration. The logbook entry quoted this modification as being accomplished in accordance with a particular FAA STC. There was no stamped STC paperwork showing the STC holder had approved this installation in this particular serial number. No drawings, notes, etc. It appeared to me that someone had done this work without getting approval of the STC holder. No go on the buy.
Well, the requirement for having the permission is a fairly recent one. That came into effect a little over 10 years ago. So any ones that were done prior to that, it did not require that the mechanic or shop that did the conversion, did the STC, did not require that there be permission. There should have been at that point, however, a 337, Form 337 that described, what they did. And unfortunately, this is another area where owners have a tendency, or the mechanics often don't even give the installation paperwork back to the owner after they've, charged for doing this. So that, some poor IA down the line is trying to figure out whether something was done correctly. And the installation instructions, are ended up in a filing cabinet in the shop that did it, which hasn't no longer been around, and so obviously that stuff ended up in a dumpster. And,
Right.
it's really frustrating when you don't have the installation instructions as the follow-on IA trying to determine whether this airplane was properly modified or not, and you don't have the installation instructions.
Okay. Let's see here. Stephen Hopper. what work order wouldn't you incorporate into the logbooks?
Anyone that didn't, reference, I mean, all if it said was annual inspection and here's the dollar part, you can write a check. Those I don't, but if they've got lists of parts and if they've got a list of parts and individual things that were done and all of that was listed in the logbook, then I wouldn't necessarily need to keep it. But it's really common for, the annual inspection, you got the entry, they did like 5 or 6 things, but you look at the work order and they charge for like 20.
Mm-hmm.
And, other than, minor cosmetic things, probably most of those should have ended up in the logbook entry. And in which case, you'd be well advised just to tuck that into another, another plastic slip case into your binder. Because you never know. 5 years later, an AD may come out on this particular thing, and you're like, I don't know, is that in my airplane?
Right, yeah.
Or did they install the new one, or did they install the old one that I now have to remove?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Next question. Should a post-maintenance test flight be recorded in the airframe logbooks?
It depends on if it's something that's being done like an STC that specifically requires, a post-maintenance test flight, then absolutely. Otherwise, it's optional.
Okay.
I mean, some mechanics and I feel that, they feel better about taking the airplane up around the patch after they've worked on it, just to, make sure that they're giving the airplane back to the customer, with everything working and trying to catch any errors that the shop might have made. That's not a requirement.
Okay.
And so it doesn't need to be in the airframe log.
Okay. Oh, well, I kind of on this note too, Rick Hayes asked, when shopping for an airplane, what telltale signs in a logbook would deter a buyer from purchasing the airplane?
Oh boy. Yeah, if it was that easy to do, I'd write a computer program that and sell it all to everybody who's going to buy the airplane. In truth, based on, many years of experience with a particular airplane, you can build a picture of what the airplane has been through, what the general quality of the maintenance, because you pretty much know the airplane through its life cycle, about when, what should have been done to the airplane, and you find out that, it wasn't done to the, you're looking for stuff that hasn't been done. I guess if there's one thing, is I would look at, and it's usually one of the first things I look at when I'm doing, because potentially it can scotch the deal. I had a case with a 180 Comanche a couple 3 years ago, where they sent me the logs, and the airplane was advertised as having X number of hours since overhaul. Well, the first thing I looked at was the last overhaul. It wasn't signed off as an overhaul at all. He basically took pieces out of 3 different engines and put them together. So, with that, I called or sent an email to the client, and I said, this airplane is not as it was advertised. You've got a Franken engine in here. Are you sure you want me to look at the rest of the logbooks? And they went, oh God, no. And he went off screaming in the night, and I, deleted the logbooks, went on to the next project.
Yeah.
That was the shortest logbook review I think I've ever done.
Okay.
But yes, looking at the overhaul, I've had, more recent where people have said the airplane had been overhauled. Well, a mechanic an engine shop had split the case to replace the cam and called it a repair and not an overhaul, and then later he replaced all the cylinders, and he wanted to call that an overhaul. And it's like, it's not an overhaul. You know, this isn't a 700-hour engine. This is a 1,700-hour since major engine.
Right.
Yes, it's had a lot of work, and yes, it probably will go further than TBO, but you know, you're the buyer. How lucky do you feel?
Right.
That buyer fled too.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. Norbert has a question. Interesting. What is the best way to log an owner-produced part for older airplanes when parts are no longer available?
There should be two entries. There should be the entry from the owner, describing there are a few requirements, one of which has to be met really to establish that it is in fact an owner produced part, and there's some gray area in the FAA's regulations on that. But you know, one perfect way to do it that has no issues at all is to say that you know, I took such and such a part, I gave it to the machine shop, asked them to duplicate the part, I got the part back, I compared it to the old one, it appears to look, fit and function and dimensions and everything was, you know, was correct. And then, you know, you sign that in the logbook as the owner, and then the mechanic or the IA is going to take it, inspect it, and then sign off the installation of the part. But the owner is now taking responsibility for the part, and the IA is not responsible for the work that was done unless it was just obviously defective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if the owner hands you an aluminum part to replace what a steel part, you know, it's like, okay, you know, you can figure that one out. But
Right.
you know, you're not held if, you know, the shop used a deficient grade of steel or something on the part. You can't really be expected to the mechanic to be required to inspect it to that degree. If it appears to be reasonably, you know, an accurate reproduction, then you're good to go as a mechanic to install it, and then just say, you know, removed, you know, whatever the part was, bracket such and such, and installed owner produced parts, see above entry from the owner, and you know, go on with the rest of your entry and return the airplane to service.
Okay. Steve Ellis has a question. Kristin, do you like AD log? I use it for, he uses it, it's about $35 a year. And he's, let's see, he's spent, he's had it for about 3 years, I guess. Have you used it?
Yeah, I have not for my airplanes. I have not used it. You know, it's usually about $300 or something like that to buy in, and then it's an annual, like, you know, like he says, $35 a year or something. Where they send you, you know, new sheets when ADs come out, so you get a notification from them as well as the FAA that, you know, this AD has come out. It's a good system. It's easy. It's easy to maintain. What I find is that rarely does an owner, you know, maintain it throughout.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, they have a tendency to get tired. So, you know, logbook number 1, you know, was an old one from Piper, and then, you know, logbook number 2 is the ad log, and then they got halfway through the ad log, and then they went back to old. I have yet to look at an airplane that has had ad log from day 1 through.
That kind of, with Steve's question, it was one of the things he's had it for the last 3 years, and he's had no new ADs come through. So that's what I kind of wanted to know, you know, is a good, you know, worth the money, I guess, basically. So.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the reasons that, you know, people have a tendency to drop out of it. We haven't had any new Comanche ADs since 2015. So, they don't come through very regularly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads to another question. My 1980 Piper Warrior II, this is from Richard. Logbooks for airframe, engine, and propeller are just about full. Do you have any suggestions on how to best continue the logbooks? For example, airframe book 2, prop book 2, etc.
Yeah, just by, what I do is basically go up on the aircraft spruce website or Sporties or something and order a fresh book and, close that one out and, make a notation that this is the start of logbook 3, from such and such a date and take it from there.
Okay.
Okay. Don Vencura said, is painting something that needs to be logged? Painting an aircraft?
Yes.
It does.
Yeah, it's certainly maintenance, and you certainly want to know whether they've stripped the airplane. You certainly want to know, and certainly the FAA wants to know, if you've been painting control surfaces, did you go and balance those control surfaces after you're done?
Oh, okay.
That's part of a complete job, and yeah, it certainly does need to be logged.
Okay, excellent.
Also good to have, what should be as part of the maintenance records needs to be, whether it came in a work order or came in a logbook entry, is what colors they used and who manufactured the paint. So, 5 years down the road, if you want to do some touch up, you have some idea of where to get the proper paint to do a touch up.
Okay. Let's see here. Gordon asks, there was an FAA 337 on the TW entry, but it was not stamped by the FAA as a field approval. Don't think this is a proper entry.
If it has an STC, it does not need to be stamped. A field approval is when you don't have an STC to provide the approved data to make the alteration. Major repairs, major alterations need to have FAA approved data. And a 337 or a STC is the FAA approving the installation as approved data, based on the installation instructions that were provided.
Okay.
So it does not have to have the field approval is when you want to make a change that you don't have a 337 for.
Okay, thank you. And I think to wrap it up, we have one last question from Rick. How do we contact you if we need your service in the future?
Well, pretty much every slide there had my email address on it. It's Kristin@theaviatrix.com.
But now we're just about ready to draw for the gift certificate, but I wanted to thank Kristin.
Yeah, for time.
Very informative, great seminar. Thanks for being here. I want to thank Aircraft Spruce for helping to sponsor this and provide the gift certificate.